Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Thank you for tuning in today. The first day of early voting. Got people waiting in lines to go and vote here in Lubbock and throughout the state of Texas. And joining us in studio this morning, you'll find his name on the ballot when you go and vote. Congressman Jodey Arrington, welcome back.
Great to be back, and God bless West Texas, and certainly the most consequential election in our lifetime, Chad, I think maybe in the history of this country because of the stark difference between the two parties at the national level and with this presidential election. So, but before we get started, let me say a big happy birthday to you. I know you just turned, 25, 26?
Yes, I'll take it.
Although if your listeners could see all the gray in your beard, they would know that was a facetious
The gray in the beard
comment.
has exploded in 2020.
That's, 2020's brought a lot of gray and baldness to a lot of my friends and fellow West Texans. But it's great to be here, and thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And let's talk about this campaign. Of course, you're on the ballot. Everyone's been focusing on the presidential election. Talk about some of the things that if you win re-election, some of the things that you would like to do, kind of in your next term.
You bet. Well, I'm very proud of my record, and I think leadership is about delivering results. And we hit the ground running with a farm bill that restored cotton. That's billions to West Texas. There was a competition for hosting the next generation bomber. We have the largest B-1 bomber base in Abilene, Texas. That's Dyess Air Force Base. And just speaking regionally, getting the B-21 there at that base for the remainder of the 21st century is no small impact to a base that provides $1 million a day in economic impact. Beyond that, just speaking for our country, historic tax cuts. I mean, we saw an explosion in economic growth and job creation. We ended up with more jobs than we had people to fill it. That's a great problem to have. And that was because we restored economic freedom to this great marketplace. And that's regulatory cuts, that's tax cuts. And then now in Ways and Means, I get to work on free and fair trade alongside President Trump. We have the model with USMCA, but we've basically restructured over 50% of our international markets. The most important one was China, structural reforms, the largest purchase agreement ever. That's going to be a very complicated relationship going forward. But the list is long, and I'm proud of it. I'd say veterans, I'd put that at the top of the list. I was chair of a subcommittee. We helped our rural veterans. We were passing the post 9/11 GI Bill to provide more educational opportunities for veterans. We've done a whole lot, and I'd say that what I want to do is a whole lot more of what we did when we had the majority working alongside of our president. By the way, the first job is to defend this country, provide for the common defense, and rebuilding the military after the decimated cuts from the Obama administration, where we were losing more troops in training than on the battlefield. Unacceptable. We've had record investment to rebuild it. We've given troops pay raises every year since I've been in Congress. We're doing the right things. Their spirit and morale is high, and I'd say our enemies fear us and respect us, and our allies know we'll be there for them. But I give the president a lot of credit on this. But, that's what I would do a whole lot more of. It's been an honor to represent West Texas and be the voice for your listeners in our nation's capital. Yeah,
absolutely. You have Nancy Pelosi, who's Speaker of the House. Just looking at all the projections, the House, and we're hoping for a miracle, but it looks as though the House will stay in the Democrats' hands moving forward. But, hey, anything can happen. It's an election. If it stays controlled by Nancy Pelosi or whoever the next speaker may be, do you view yourself as someone who is on defense or offense, or is it a little bit of both?
I use the Nehemiah leadership model from the Bible, where he was building the wall with one hand and with the other he had a sword. I think you got to be able to wield the sword and shovel if we're going to keep this great experiment in liberty and democracy alive and well for our children. There'll be a whole lot more wielding the sword. I'll tell you that if Nancy Pelosi continues as our speaker.
It just doesn't seem like she wants to work with any of the Republicans.
Pure partisanship, pure political theater, and then weaponization. Everywhere you turn, she has used and abused the powers, the oversight authority, every tool at her disposal to discredit and undermine this president. So, yeah, we're going to do a whole lot more fighting for our freedoms against this radical socialist agenda that she's advancing because the radical left has co-opted the agenda. She sold out to get the speakership, and I suspect that's what will happen if they maintain the House. There's still hope, and I'll tell you, the one we can't lose is the presidency. We cannot afford to give Biden-Harris the levers of power in the executive branch. It will make Obama era look like Captain Kangaroo and Romper Room compared to what they would do to tyranny of executive authority day in and day out, whether it's implementing the Green New Deal by regulation, by regulatory fiat, or gun control. The list is endless, and it's scary. And at the end of the day, it's an attack on what is the heart of this experiment and what makes America special and our exceptionalism, which is our freedom. And that will be under assault every day. Now, can you work on a farm bill? Sure. Can you work on a highway bill? If she pivots and decides to work like we have traditionally on these things in a bipartisan way. So, yes, there's some shovel opportunities, but there's going to be a whole lot of wielding the sword to fight for our future.
I think it was last week Senator Cruz was asked, how worried he is about the election and how worried he is about the presidential election. And he said he's pretty worried about it. What's your confidence level right now?
I think it's still neck and neck, in my opinion. I think the polls are not to be trusted. I think the pundits are playing games with the American people like they did before. 8 million Trump voters did not show up in the midterms that will be out with fire and fury to cast their vote for this president. I think that the president's record, and this what was frustrating during the debate, is there's never been a president that's achieved more, that's accomplished more, that's been more faithful to his promises in the campaign than this president. And he has restored the greatness of our country in so many ways. I listed several that I worked on, but really that was working alongside of his leadership. So I think at the end of the day, when they see the left burning down our cities, they see this radical agenda, and they see his achievements relative to all that crazy, I still think this president remains our president for 4 more years. It will be a tougher lift to keep the House, but, we've got 17 seats net. We had 100,000 votes that we lost by, essentially. I like our chances. I really do. I think we're still in the game. You cannot trust the polls right now. People don't like to deal with pollsters because they associate them with the liberal media, and they think that they, too, are manipulating our country. And so, I'm feeling, look, it's not a sure thing, but any part of the ticket from top to bottom can break either way. Yeah. That's scary, but we're in the game, I think, up and down the ticket this year.
Let's take the break. We'll have one more segment when we come back with Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Congressman Jodey Arrington in studio. He's on your ballot. Remember, no straight party ticket voting anymore. You got to go through the entire ballot in order to vote. And Congressman, we do appreciate you taking some time to join us today. And
you bet. Of
course, remind folks, get out there and vote. And you are on the ballot, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Well, I've been blessed. You don't need a lot of luck when you feel that God's grace was there to open the door and he's there to sustain me every day, get up and fight. And people say, how can you do this with Pelosi every day? And well, first of all, it's our country and it's my children's future and it's the children and grandchildren of your listeners. But the other is I believe God's called me to do this. I won't do it forever. I don't believe in career politicians. That's why I am, made as part of my agenda term limits. I think a term of President Trump will bring a greater emphasis on draining the swamp, and I have greater hopes that term limits will be something that could get traction in a second term of President Trump. So anyway, it's an honor, and it's a blessing, and it's a labor of love.
What is happening with, you've got so many moving parts of, whether it's just overall called stimulus in the House right now, but there are so many moving parts. You have the airlines, that are dealing with that. The president kind of blew up the talks, and then he said, wait a minute, I want standalone bills. Nancy Pelosi seems to want the number just keeps going up. She wants everything funded for every Democrat pet project out there. Where are we right now?
First of all, there are billions of dollars unspent. And for fiscal conservatives, and with a country that's in debt now more than we've ever been relative to the size of our economy at $28 trillion and over 100% debt to GDP, there is a consequence to just throwing money at it. So number one, let's figure out where we still have some gaps to fill. And there are some on individuals and families that are still struggling because they work in an industry that has a longer recovery tail. There is $130 billion plus for the PPP program. It's been wildly successful. It's been a lifeline. It's saved 50 million jobs. And that should be something we could do easily, except Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to give this president a win. That's what it comes down to. She is not interested, Chad, in governing. She's not interested in finding some compromise that we could push forward because she knows the president would get the credit. And right now, it's a mad dash to unseat the president in her mind, and they have him right where they want him in their minds. And so forget the fact that we have millions of Americans still struggling, still hobbling along, although I would submit to you the biggest culprit in our struggle to recover are state and local shutdown orders. It's really a local and state policy matter. It's a matter of freedom. It's a matter of governments taking not just our freedom, but our private property and ability to make a living for ourselves. So I would put more pressure on local and state, authorities around the country for their policies to shut in and shut down our economy, our schools, which will, by the way, the World Health Organization just came out, the point person on COVID, along with 15,000 doctors and public health officials around the world, they've come out saying you've got to open up. You're going to do far greater harm to the economy and to the health of our citizens if we continue with this posture. So it would have been nice to hear that, 3 months ago.
Do you think let's say if Joe Biden wins the election, do you think he'll shut down the government again?
Heck no. He knows better. He knows the damage it's doing. And quite frankly, to have the mentality that you will win at all costs, even if it hurts our country in the short term, that's, I think, where the Democrat leadership is. And I think that's where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are. They know that this is bad long term, but they know that this will help their chances if they can keep the economy kind of sputtering along. So I rarely question the motives of my colleagues, but in this case, there's way too much evidence that we don't need the extreme measures that Biden and Harris have been propagating.
Yeah, but I mean, you see where some states may. I mean, you may have some governors that do it. I mean, it's almost like they're setting us up for that. It seems just by reading some of the headlines that are out there saying, okay, it's about to get worse. It's about to get worse. It almost seems like they're trying to set us up for another economic shutdown, which would be just devastating to this country.
If they owned it, that is, if Biden were president, they would change their tune. But because this president is in office and we have an election, they're going to throw everything at him that they can to discredit, undermine his efforts, and really hurt our country. That's what we've seen. I mean, listen, this president was standing up the COVID task force, and he was banning or putting restrictions on travel from China and other countries. He was doing these things early on. Guess what the Democrats were doing at that time? They were finalizing their impeachment scam in the Senate. So while they were perpetrating the greatest abuse of our Constitution and the United States Congress, this president was actually focused on trying to protect Americans and trying to figure out sort of how we can move forward in the most productive way. That's just one little example of what's happened over the last couple of years.
You have, and to your credit, you've been talking about the debt for a long time. Since you were elected, you've been talking about the debt. Not a lot of your colleagues on the left or the right seem to have cared about the debt much, since 2016. Moving forward, how do we, and again, I think we have to get past all the COVID stuff before we maybe even begin tackling that. But how do you tackle the massive issue that is the debt, and how do you convince people that it is an issue?
Well, it's hard to convince people it's an issue when no one feels any pain. That is, we just continue to borrow on the backs of our children. It's just a complete immoral act, while we don't cut your favorite projects or your favorite programs, and we don't raise your taxes. So no one feels any pain. We wonder why we have a generation, the 80 million strong voting bloc, which is the millennial essentially generation, who wants and expects everything to be free. We've created this monster, but we have to attack the process. We've got to hold Congress accountable for budgeting responsibly. I actually have a bipartisan group that I brought together, 30 Democrats, 30 Republicans. It's never happened before since I've been there. And we're all about putting reforms in place to reduce our debt to GDP and our deficit spending. It may be one of my most proud accomplishments, but I've got people from all over the spectrum politically and equal numbers on both sides. And we're working this. And in fact, we sent a letter to leadership saying, here are 3 legislative reforms that would fundamentally change our debt trajectory and our spending trajectory. So I'm very proud of it. I'm going to keep working on it. But you're right. Republicans haven't been any better, but that is the greatest threat long term to this country. And if a Biden and Harris ticket doesn't, bring the country down from our exceptional nature and position, then this debt certainly will in some form or other, whether it's a debt crisis, high interest rates, or what have you.
Is it about cutting programs, cutting spending, or increasing taxes?
Oh, it's about the size and scope of our government. Yeah. I mean, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. But we also have budget process problems. That is, the process doesn't allow us or doesn't force us to do what every household does and every government at every other level and every business, and that's balance the budget. We can do that if the will is there and if the president will come alongside to help us.
Congressman, appreciate your time. We'll wish you the best of luck for re-election, and we'll visit with you again soon.
Go West Texas.
All right. That's Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show.